Hello everyone and welcome to the rebuild of my custom PC. This time I'll be adding custom water cooling, so that should be interesting. I'll be using the following non-water cooling parts: the Lian Li PC011 Dynamic. The motherboard is an MSI X570A Pro. We have a Ryzen 7 2700X as our CPU of choice. Two M.2 drives, 500GB for booting, 2TB for storage, in nice EK heatsinks so they look a bit better. We have 4 sticks of 8GB RGB HyperX Fury RAM at 3200 MHz speeds with a cache latency of 16. We will be pairing that with the Radeon RX 5700 XT. This is any reference model. Totally overkill HX 1200 that I got on the cheap. Thermaltake Commander for PWM control, and we have 6 Cooler Master Halo fans that look really nice. I've been lazy and I left the motherboard in from the install I did before, using mainly air cooling. So installing the Ryzen 7 2700X into the motherboard is pretty easy. We align the golden triangle on the CPU with the one on the board, push down the retention arm once it's in, and you're done. For the RAM, it's important to align the little indent in the sticks with your motherboard, as I did wrong on the first try here. Have the tabs open, push it in, and push it in until the tab closes. Some motherboards have tabs on one side, some have tabs on two sides. Mine has tabs on one, I prefer two, because it makes it easier to put the RAM in, because in this configuration you have to get the one side correctly before you can even start pushing. Anyways, I'll be doing that 4 times since I have 4 sticks, so it makes it easier. My reason to go for 32 gigs is not so much that I really need it. I'm using more than 16 sometimes, but that's not really the reason to go for it. I just really don't like having an empty slot in between my 2 RAM sticks, and I think this just looks really sick. And with RAM prices having gone down of lately, I figured, why not? It kind of helps me out in certain tasks, and for that price I could do it. Next up, we're going to be installing the M.2 drives that I have. This is a Samsung 960 EVO, which is the 500 gig boot drive. It's TLC, so it's pretty secure. Just add the little screw. You'll probably be using a Phillips head size 0 or size 00 for these tiny screws that come with them. And having a magnetic screwdriver here helps. Once again, it's just aligning the indent with the slots on the motherboard. They will be pushing up a little bit, and you can just push them down once you have the screw. The second drive I am using is the Intel 660p, which is a 2TB version. It's QLC, it's a bit slower, but for storage it's still really good when compared to regular SSDs or even hard drives, especially against hard drives. And with that out of the way, let's look at some of the hardware components we have. I'm using all EK parts, starting off with the Quantum Velocity DRGB block for the processor. We have a DRGB EK Quantum Vector for the graphics card with a black matching backplate, also in DRGB of course. I'll be soft tubing, even though this case is really good for hard tubing. This is my first water-cooled build, I didn't want to do that. We will be using the specific O11 distro plate with the pump attached. I have two 360mm radiators, one of 25mm thick, one 37mm thick, with a slimmer one going up top. I'll be using regular clear fluid. I don't feel like changing my loop every few months. I figured this would be best for starters. Thermal Greasy Hydronaut 40 paste and all quantum torque fittings. And now that we've seen all of that, let's take a look at the EK Quantum Velocity box. It comes in a nicely printed tin cardboard box, which has a bit thicker black cardboard box inside of it, with the EK logo on top. When you open it up, I just want to check you have all your custom loop parts, which is quite a nice touch I think, but most people looking into it will already have those. Some mounting screws, that's a block in a nice sealed bag. Some thermal grizzly, not sure if it's cryonaut or hydronaut. I will be using the bigger tube I've got since I could use this one somewhere else. And as you can see in the back, I've already installed some of the custom cables I have for the motherboard. This mainly because it might be harder to get to these once I have more parts installed. The choice for the motherboard as well might seem a bit odd to some people since it's mainly a content creator focused board. I just really like the look. It has two M.2s, which I want. And yeah, I just think it looks pretty rad. Either way, as you can see, I've now got the velocity block. It looks really nice. And it has a little header on it for the RGB. Now I did a manual spread underneath the block because I know people tend to get all pissed about how you apply your thermal paste. But this is a nice distro block. The only regret I have about this one is that the cables on it are kind of ketchup and mustard. You have a white Molex header with a black and yellow cable coming out of it, as well as a PWM cable with a white header that is green and blue. A bit of peel porn, EK does this on every single one of their logos. I think it's a nice touch. The block's actually quite a heavy object, and it's quite easy to fix actually. It just requires me to put 12 screws behind the tray that I'm putting it in. This one is assigned specifically to go into the side. I believe they also do one for the Excel version, but this is the regular version. It's just a bit shorter than the side panel, which I guess makes sense, so you can try and align it a little bit better if you need specific runs to be very straight. And talking about straighter runs, I heard from someone later that you can turn around the CPU block 90 degrees, which would have helped in my case. Currently the ports are horizontally on the same level, which makes the runs in the end a bit worse. Now, one of the nice things about this distro plate is that all your runs are already thought out. It has enough plugs on it to do a single red setup, but I'll be taking some out because I'm doing two radiators, one in the bottom, one in the top. And yeah, that's about it. So at this point, it's just me putting in the screws, tightening it, and thinking about what height would be good for me. As you can see, I've already installed the fans to the radiators off camera. This isn't much interesting. It's just applying the screws. One of the nice touches about these Halo fans that I'm using is that their RGB connectors can be daisy chained, which means that instead of needing to work with 9 RGB headers in total, I now only have 5 to contend with. It's still a cable mess behind my motherboard at the end of the project, but I think it's a very nice touch, especially if you don't want to go around with an RGB splitter and only have 1 or 2 headers on your motherboard, like most manufacturers have. So this is the slimmer top radiator that I'm installing first. And the first thing I wanted to do is make sure all the cabling was routed to the back before I fixate it. I mainly used a cross pattern to screw, meaning I would do one of the farthest corner first, then go all the way across. That means it's fixated, and then you have no worries at all in doing the other 10 screws that need to go in. You could of course stick with 2, but I'm not that kind of PC builder. So this is the slimmer 25mm radiator. I wanted to keep some space up top for the custom cable that runs there, making sure it doesn't touch the fan, that the chassis still looks a bit open up there, as well as making it easier to do some maintenance in the front if needed. And then for the bottom, I've tilted the case. It's just again an issue of getting those cables through the bottom, making sure that those are already kind of routed through the holes I need them to. Then once again fixating the 2 screws on the sides, and then once again crossing it over. On the bottom I'll be having an intake, so there'll be a dust filter on this in the end. And I think that works out pretty fine. I have 3 intake fans and 3 exhaust. So this should give me plenty of cooling potential for the build that I currently own. I've gone ahead and installed the GPU block off camera. It's a lot of screwing, a lot of thermal pad cutting, and mainly just a long test that isn't really that interesting to watch. One of the downsides to this card, in my opinion, is the little RGB header that is coming off of the front side where the fittings go in. I think it would have been nicer if this one was just routed through the card, but I've rerouted it later and it's less fittable now. The card is now a single slot card with the change of the cooler. And this means that if you're running multiple or if you really need that space for an expansion card, you could use that. In my case, that's not applicable. I'm not running a sound card, especially since my headset is a USB headset. I won't be running a network card since I have perfect cable internet where I am right now. There's no need for me to insert anything else. After that, it's just installing the GPU into the slot, screwing down the one single PCIe screw that I still need to do. And that's it really. I forgot to grab my PCI slots out. And I had to check if it's in there solidly because my PCIe slot is a bit unstable. This is giving me some booting issues later and also some stability issues that are at this point finally solved with pushing the card in really hard again. So at this point, as you can see, I've unmounted the power supply since that took up some space that I needed for my fan cables. I've inserted most of the fittings in the way I thought I was going to use them. The only angled ones that were staying in place were the ones on my GPU. I am no longer using angled adapters in the end, and Franco is coming to inspect. I had to replace the angled adapters in order to make the connections up front, because those were really small and I couldn't really make those without necking the tubing. One of my big regrets is that my camera stopped filming while I was doing the tubing runs, but here you can see the final result of those. I've had a lot of kitchen towels just to make sure that if anything leaked, I could spot it quite soon and I wouldn't really damage any parts. I'm using one of the EK filling bottles and I have a 24-pin jumper in place. It felt a bit too wacky doing a paperclip when you're spending a lot of money on the water cooling part anyways, and then spending 2 or 3 euros on one of those 24-pin jumpers really doesn't feel like much. With the tiny nozzle that is on the bottle by default, filling it took a long time, so I just cut that one off because I couldn't really grab it out of there. Made it a lot easier, especially since there's a lot of loop to fill. As you can see, I'm using 2x45-degree adapters and 90-degree adapters out front to make longer runs. From the original plan that you should use when you're using this specific distro plate, I only changed those two runs to cross over because I just made it easier to run them in front. And yeah, at this point I'm just checking if there isn't any leaks. And well, at this point I'd like you to guess how many leaks you think I'm gonna get during this build. The answer is not 0. That's one thing that's for sure. And at this point, I noticed leak number 1. I didn't tighten one of the fittings well, or at least it untightened itself when I tried twisting the tubing on in the direction that it untightens in, so I accidentally untightened the fitting. So that was leak number 1. Off to the kitchen. Time to empty it, clean everything. I checked the O-ring, everything was fine. I just really had to make sure that the fitting was screwed in correctly and so that it wouldn't leak. So at this point it was just screwing it back in. I did the bottom one first at this point because I knew that was the one giving me problems. It's a bit of an annoying thing to screw in, especially if you have the tubing on there already. And once that's done, it's just getting the other end of the tube over the little barb and tightening down the ring. Once that's done, it was back to filling it up again. And well, we're at 1 leak at this point, so we'll see where we end up. Of course, adding more kitchen paper. I knew from certain points that they wouldn't leak, or at least they looked leak-proof enough that I was confident not using as much paper towels. Because, well, I hadn't seen it leak before, water has been through there, they should be good. So at least I knew the GPU and CPU ones were okay. And I think those were also the easiest to run, and also they were the last runs that I did, which means I was a lot more confident in my pushing on the tubing and not accidentally unscrewing the fittings. So yeah, back to filling her up. So again, trying to get the fill bottle through that little hole. Run it. You can see the water already, or cryofuel already walking away. And well, something I noticed while editing this video is that there was one more leak that I had thought, but I didn't notice this one because I noticed another one when I was filming this. And after that one, I just went ahead and checked tightness of all the fittings, which made me not have any leaks afterwards because that was the main point. So here we are in the kitchen. This should give you a better view of the runs I have in front crossing over. And I personally think this looks quite nice, especially since it's one of the things hard tubing can do. I'm not completely satisfied with the runs I have between the GPU and the CPU. They are a bit too long. If I am going to clean the loop, I will probably shorten those a little bit. But in the end, it's just a process of continuing to run it until you've reach the point where your reservoir is getting refilled by your loop, then topping that one off a little bit. And after that, I kept it running for about 24 hours just to clean out all the air. There was, especially in the CPU block, there was quite a massive air bubble, and even in the week after, I still noticed air bubbles coming out sometimes. So after that week, I topped off the reservoir. There wasn't actually that much cryo fuel missing, but it was still a bit. And the reservoir looks a lot better when you filled it up to a certain level than when you've got it half filled. All in all, I have to say I'm pretty happy with the process. It was a process of learning, but I can't say I've really regretted it. The end result, as you can see here, is looking very nice. One of the things I did notice later on when watching this video, just like the turret leak, was that one of my fans in the top was turned a quarter 90 degree as opposed to the other ones next to it, which meant that its RGB was off as opposed to those other two. So I fixed it after this video, but I didn't feel like taking it back to the table because the total system weighs 21.2 kilograms. So yeah, it's quite a massive unit. Already the case on itself is like 8 kilograms, but those radiators, that distro plate and that GPU add so much weight to it, and it's not gonna be fun moving it. Anyways, thank you for watching, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed watching this. I might have some more projects coming up soon, and I hope I can do build logs on them like this one.